Hello, guys. Good afternoon. I hope you're well. Welcome to the the last lesson of the week. I hope you had a good time. What are we going to talk about today? Well, remember we've been talking about networks and we've been talking about the internet and all those things, right? One of the things that we started off with was the computing device that you need to connect to the internet with, the computing device that you need to have as a saver, right? So I just thought that maybe it's a good day today to refresh your memory on the most important aspects to consider when you're trying to buy a computer, right? So today we're going to talk about storage, right? So that it kind of like links with what we've been doing. And this also should be, at the end of this lesson, you should be able to make an informed decision when you're trying to buy a computer, right? So I think it's going to be an interesting lesson. And today is Friday, we're going for a long weekend. Um, it would be good to take something away for a long weekend, and let's see how it goes, right? So there is a confusion between memory and storage. So we are going to learn about the difference between memory and storage, interpreting adverts. Now, I'm sure you have at some point had a little confusion when it comes to what memory is and what storage is, because on your phone right now you probably have a memory card, but it is not exactly memory. Yes, it's called a memory card, but it is actually storage. So these are terms that are used or interchangeably and in a loose way, especially when people don't have the full background of what each device does. So we're going to look at that today, the difference between memory and storage. Then we're also going to look at interpreting adverts, so that when you want to buy a computer, you know you buy the computer that suits your needs, and you also buy a computer that suits your budget. Okay, so let's start. The difference between memory and storage. What is memory? Right. Let us first of all start with memory. Now, when you talk about a computing device and you are referring to memory, you're basically referring to its RAM, right? What does RAM stand for? RAM stands for random access memory, isn't it? So what happens is inside each computing device there is a RAM chip, right? This is a standard, as you can see on the picture there. This is a standard RAM chip for desktop computers, right? So what happens is it's the size of maybe a 15 centimeter or 12 centimeter in length, right? So inside the computer system unit you have a motherboard. You should remember what a motherboard is from your studies in grade 10. A large circuit boards where all the computer devices are attached to, and it is found inside the system unit, right? So that's for a standard desktop, right? Then you have devices such as your phone, for example, a smartphone. There is actually a small RAM chip that will be soldered or fixed into the motherboard of your smartphone. Similarly with laptop, it's also attached to the motherboard. So all computing devices have got some sort of memory, random access memory attached to it. So, and sometimes this random access memory is confused with ROM, right? Read-only memory. So you need also to distinguish between what RAM is and what ROM is. All right, and then the other name, well, the other names for RAM or memory, like we just said, it's called RAM, random access memory. Sometimes it's called temporary memory, especially when you're trying to confuse it with the storage, right? So it's temporary memory, and this is one of the terms that is used especially on adverts. It says main memory, right? So it is known as the primary storage, right? um, RAM is known as primary storage. So that gives you an idea of what secondary storage is. And then the most important thing about, well, I don't know if to say it's the most important, but one of the main features of random access memory is that it keeps data when the power is on. Right now, here is the scenario. You've got storage, right, which is predominantly the hard drive. Then you've got memory, which is actually the RAM, right? So every time when you're working on a computer, things are either stored in memory or in storage, are either stored in a hard disk or in RAM, right? So what happens is whenever you're using your computer, whatever you open, is it whether when you start your computer, for example, when you start your computer, you load in the operating system, right? Remember what we said, an operating system is operating system, something like Windows 10, Windows 7, Linux, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, and all those, right? So what happens is when you start a computing device, the operating system is loaded into memory. So memory only stores data that you're currently using. For example, you're using the operating system, so it's stored in memory. Why is that the case? We'll find out as we move on through the lesson, right? But it is important to understand that RAM is temporary, meaning that it keeps data for only certain periods of time. That is when the power is on, the power of the device. If the device is on, like right now, I'm giving you this lesson through Microsoft Teams, right? That's one. Two, the presentation is Microsoft PowerPoint. So both of these programs are actually in memory as we speak, right? But if I switch off my computer, automatically all the things that were stored in it will go away. But then the software itself is actually permanently stored in hard drive. We're going to talk about that as well. All right, so it is electronic, therefore it is fast, right? We'll also talk about what, when we say it's electronic, what do we mean exactly, right? So you need to understand what we need to understand is the mechanism behind how storage and memory store data. That is important, especially when it comes to the part where it says it is electronic. All right. It is measured in gigabytes, right? Lower gigabytes, if I may say, right? Unlike storage. So now these are the foremost features of random access memory. As you can see, there are many of them, obviously, but for the purposes of trying to distinguish between RAM and storage, we're going to start off with these ones so that we understand. But the good thing is, I know from your previous studies, you already have an idea of what we're talking about. So it shouldn't be that confusing. But there are other things that we probably were taking for granted to say this is what is what. But now we need to have a mature approach towards the differences between the two. Unlike when we're in grade 10, you're just told that it keeps the data when the power is on, it is electronic, but you never really understood what that meant exactly. All right, now let's move on to storage. Right, storage actually took many forms, right? For those of you that started using computers a long time ago, we had something called a floppy disk. You see these two, these were called floppy disks. Some used to call them stiffy disks, right? So storage takes many forms. It is, we've got floppy drives, although they are no longer being used now, memory cards, flash drives, the hard disk drive, CDs, DVDs, uh, portable hard drives and all those things. So that's storage for you, right? So this is more permanent, right? Not to say that if we say it's permanent memory, it means whatever you put on the hard disk doesn't go away. Well, if you decide to delete it, for example, it will go away. So, but the permanent in this sense is that even if the computer is off, when you switch it on tomorrow, you still have your data in it there, right? It is not, sometimes it's called non-volatile memory. Non-volatile, also talking about that it doesn't lose its contents whenever the power is turned off. All right. So the other name that we can give it, remember we said RAM is uh, temporary storage, sorry, it's primary storage. Now the storage is actually secondary, known as secondary storage. Keeps the data when the power is off. You say that. It can be electronic, magnetic, or optical. That means the way it functions, right? It can use electricity, or it can use magnetism, or it can use optics. We're also going to talk about that, what that means. All right. It is also measured in gigabytes, but these are higher gigabytes now. We're talking of 500 gigabytes up to a terabyte, 2 terabytes, right? You don't get a situation whereby you've got RAM that is 500 gigabytes. The best that I've heard of course, maybe they are new technology. With our subject, things change rapidly, and but the best I've heard of is 64 gigabytes of RAM, right? I'm not sure. I can't say for sure if there are more of them. So, yeah, you can always find out. But when it comes to the fact that storage is got more gigabytes than RAM is, I can assure you that I have not heard of 1 terabyte of RAM. But of course, there's 2 terabyte of storage or even more. All right. Now, here is the most common thing that happens, especially in your exams. You would be asked to differentiate between storage and memory, and you need to lay out your case very well, and you need to show the examiner that you really understand what you're talking about, right? But you need also to, whenever it comes to differentiating, what people usually do is that they just say what storage is and what memory is, but that is not enough, especially when you're now in grade 11. You need to sort of like, maybe if I may use the word, synthesize your answer. It should be clear and unambiguous. It should show that you've got a higher level of understanding of what you're talking about, right? And actually that also impresses the examiner when you really show him or her that you know exactly what you're talking about. So when it comes to differentiating storage and memory, there are things that you have to keep in mind, right? So the first thing that you have to think of is how they function. What is their function? What is the purpose of storage? What is the purpose of memory, right? The purpose of memory is to store data and programs only when the power is on, like we said earlier on, right? Everything is stored on the hard drive. Whatever you install, whatever you save on the computer is, on a computing device, is actually saved on the hard drive, right? But whenever you need to use whatever is installed on your computer, or whatever file is stored in your computer, be it an image, a video, and so forth, for it to be processed by the central processing unit, it has to be transferred to RAM, right? Remember, there is a piece of hardware called the CPU, the central processing unit. What does the central processing unit do? It is the brain of the computer. It processes instructions, right? So the way it works is so quick, measured in megahertz. It's very, very quick. So it needs to keep on rapidly accessing commands from you, the user, right? Then it executes those commands. So remember, a computer works with software and hardware, and software is what keeps the computer running with all the instructions. It has got software is the one with the instructions of how a computer should work or how a program should work. So those instructions have to be fetched as quickly as possible, so that you, the user, you can see what you want to see on a computer. Hence, the RAM has to keep those instructions temporarily for the CPU to access, right? So it has to be temporary, because once you're done with whatever you want to do, it has to take it back to storage. So that's the first difference that you have to look at there. Memory keeps data and programs when the power is on, then storage keeps data and programs even when the power is off. So that's the first thing, function, right? Then number 2, technology. What sort of technology does storage use to store and retrieve data? And again, what sort of method does memory use? All right, memory uses electricity, right? The way it reads or saves information the the way it saves information is done by the use of electricity, right? When we talk of this whole electricity and that it uses electricity, I can say think of a train, right? Um, Especially if you are a fan of trains and you know this kids cartoon called I'm forgetting his name, Thomas and Friends. I'm sure you've watched Thomas and Friends at some point in your life, right? There are some trains there, right, and most of them have got steam that comes out, right, and they've got some equipment on the wheels that turn when the train is moving and the smoke is coming out, right? So when a train was invented, it was using coal, right? You load in the coal and that coal burns and it combusts and it moves the train, right? So that was the method of how the train moved, right? Then with time, uh, diesel was introduced. There are trains that run on diesel where you pour in the diesel is burnt and the train moves, right? Now there are electrical trains now. They've got something on top that attaches to power lines and they move fast, right? So now the memory sort of like works in that sort of manner when saving and writing. It actually uses electrical power to actually function, right? So it does that very quickly. Whereas when you talk of storage now, storage can be optical. What does that mean? It means the technology that it uses to read and write is light, right? So it does this on CDs and DVD, right? Then again, it can be magnetic. That is the hard disk drive. Magnetic, that it means it uses magnetism to attach information to it, right, or to release information. And then more recently, we have the electronic one, just like what memory does. We also have the same version for SSDs. What are SSDs? These are known as solid state drive, right? That's the hard drive that is on your smartphone, on your tablet, on some laptops as well. The latest laptops, they use an SSD, right? So SSD stands for solid state drive, right? And of course flash drives, USB memory sticks, are the ones that uses electricity to read and write data, right? So that's point number 2. First, we said it's how they function. You can differentiate them by how they function. Secondly, we said you can differentiate them by the technology they use. Thirdly, we can differentiate them in terms of capacity, right? Memory ranges from 1 gigabyte to about 64 gigabyte. Like I said earlier on, things might have changed. You never know. Probably there's now 128 gigabytes of RAM. But as far as I know, for at the moment, I've heard of that. And so memory has got lower capacity, right, compared to storage. Storage can have up to 2 terabytes or even more, depending on the latest technology that is reigning. Now, here is a situation. Why would memory have a small capacity? Why? Because it stores data temporarily. Right? Now, you have had a situation whereby your computer freezes. I'm sure maybe even today, one of your computing devices actually froze when you're trying to use it, right? Why is that so, right? Some people tend to think that the device might be infected by a virus, which might be true, but so many times it's because the programs that you have installed on your computer probably don't fit on your RAM, right? I'll give you an example. If you install a video game, PlayStation, like so FIFA 20, that requires a larger memory capacity. So now when you have got a small memory capacity, that game, when you open it, it is moved from the hard drive and it's straight into the RAM. Now in your RAM, temporarily there is an operating system, because you need to keep your device running, right? There is an operating system already there inside there. So now you have a situation whereby there is no space, right? And if there's no space, programs get stuck, they hang, like they freeze, right? So whenever you see that happening, is because your RAM is probably small for to run the software that you've put on the computer. So you should always consider getting bigger RAM, or closing programs that you're not using at the particular time. And I'm sure you know what to do when your computer freezes. I think you should know by now. It's you press Control Alt and Delete on your keyboard, and then this will give you the task manager, right? So the task manager will show you all the programs that are running on your computer, even though you don't know that you've opened them, but you see that a lot of processes are happening on your computer. Then if there's a non-responsive program, you look for that program, you click on it, it will be written not responding. So you click on it and you end the task. So it's a handy way of trying to close down a program that's not functioning well, instead of switching off the whole computer. Yeah, that's something else. All right. So the third thing that you look at is capacity, right? Then the fourth thing is the speed at which data is accessed between the two devices. When it comes to memory, it is electronic, therefore it is very fast. Think of a goods train, like a diesel train, and electrical train, or even think of a car train. Indeed, it's quite fast, right? So depending on what type of storage it is, magnetic and optical storage works in a mechanical way, therefore they are slow. In a mechanical way, it means the way they save and read is moving its parts, right? Then even electronic storage such as SSDs can also be slower than memory, because they have to deal with larger capacities, like we said earlier on. So right, so there you have it. When you're asked to differentiate between storage and memory, you look at their functionality, the storage capacity, the speed, right? What else did we talk about? The size, the capacity. So those are the things that you should always look at. It helps you remember how do they work, right? And what's the capacity, and all those things. You get full marks, and you actually show that you understand. All right. So now that we have demystified the difference between memory and storage, now we need to look at how you can actually interpret an advert, right? Now, computer adverts usually show a computer specifications, right? There are a whole lot of specifications that are actually put in a computer advert, right? So that when you want to buy a computer advert, a computer, you know exactly what is it that you want to do with the computer and stuff like that. Now, it's not really advisable to say I'm going to buy a computer because it is this brand. This brand is usually good. I've heard people ask, okay, I want to buy a computer. What do you think of this brand? Or what do you think of this brand? And I'm like, I'll be like, no. That's not what you should consider, right? Computers nowadays actually perform more or less the same. The thing that makes one computer better than the other is the specification that it has, right? The brand is there, yes, of course, one or two things, but what's really important in a computer is to know its specifications, is to know what each specification means and what it can do for you. That is very, very important, right? What to look out for, right? Before you look for anything else, what you really need to look out for is the memory size. The memory size, like we spoke, is the RAM, right? That's the RAM there. You also need to look at the storage capacity. That is the hard disk drive. Then, of course, you need to look at the processor speed, the processing power. These three things are the most important parts of any computer or any computing device. These are generally the things that determine how fast a computer works or how effective a computer is. Of course, there are plenty of other specifications that you can look at, that is the screen resolution and all the other things. But in terms of proper functionality, these are the three most important things. Whenever you want to buy a computer, you are not supposed to compromise on these ones. All right. So now, how would you interpret an advert, right? So think of a computer as an office, right? People have got offices. Your parents probably have got an office, or some of your parents are actually working on at home, are working from home, and they probably have an office or a study. So in that study, right, there are three things that whatever office you go into, you're likely to find those things, right? Okay, right. Now let's look at the CPU, right? The CPU is more like an office assistant, right? What does an office assistant do? The office assistant takes instructions from the owner of the office and does the task that he or she has been assigned to. For example, bring me the file for this company, fetches the file, and wherever it is, fetches the file and brings it to the person who would have asked for the file. Can you type this for me? Type this memo, type this letter, send these emails. Can you check my emails? That's what an office assistant does, right? So an office assistant actually takes instructions, right? So similarly, the CPU takes instructions from you, the user. Whatever command you click or you type, that fact that you just done, that thing that you've done on the computer is processed by the the CPU. So the central processing unit is the most important thing, right? So the central processing unit is measured in gigahertz, right? And its job is to process instructions. So when you get to an advert, these are the things that you should actually look at. The one that is measured in gigahertz, that's the first thing, all right? Then let's look at the RAM. The RAM is like a desk in an office, right? Whenever you're working on something, you go and fetch the files, or you fetch your textbook, you fetch your computer, you put them on the desk, right? Now, if you're working on so many things, remember these are the files that you're working on temporarily. Like right now, you're probably you have your laptop, your computer there, a book where you're writing notes, or maybe for a laptop on top. Now, your desk is probably small and it's crowded as we speak, right? So it's the same thing. When you open applications when you open applications on a computer, what happens is that there is a depending on the size of your desk. If you take so many things, you open so many applications, the RAM becomes smaller and it starts. So it's the same thing when you put so many things on a small desk, things that you're currently working on, some might fall over because your desk is small. So the desk is more like the RAM, right? Holds all programs, that is instructions and data it is actually busy working on, all right? And then the third most important thing is the hard disk drive, right? What do you think the hard disk drive is? What do you think it is? Yes, you guessed it right. It's like a storage cabinet or the drawers on the desk, right? This is where all your files are kept, right? So a file cabinet is more like the hard disk. This is where you store all your things. So if you really need to use them, you can't use any file in a file cabinet, right? So what you do, you take out the files in your cabinet, you put them on your desk, right? So it's the same thing. The CPU, when given an instruction, it goes and fetches the files in storage or programs in storage, and it places them in the RAM, which is on your desk, then you can actually what process it. So the bigger your file cabinet is, the more storage space you have, right? So it makes you work fast, easier, because you've got enough space. All right, so hard drive keeps data more permanently. All right, let's look at an example of an advert. Those of you that have tried to buy a computer before, I'm sure you've came across some data like this, right? So these are the typical specifications that you'll find on an advert, right? First, that's the specification for CPU, Intel i5 3.1 gigahertz, right? Intel is actually a company that manufactures processors, right? So there are quite a number of companies that that manufacture CPUs. AMD, I'm sure you've heard of something like that. Celeron also manufactures, all those type of, I think it's Intel Celeron or something like that, right? So i5, like you've got Core i3, Core i5, Core i7, Core i9. Those are just generations of processors, right? The Core i9 being the one of the fastest, right? Then the 3.1 gigahertz is the number of instructions that it can process in a given second. Almost 3.1 million instructions in a given second, right? Like I said, if you open your task manager, you see all the processes that are running on a computer, and those processes are being processed by a CPU each given moment, right? Then that next specification there is the RAM, right? So this particular one will have 4 gigabytes of RAM, right? Then the other specification that we have, this computer probably has got two hard disks, sorry, two hard drives, right? The other one is 128 gigabyte solid state drive, and the other one is 1 terabyte hard disk drive, right? So whenever you decide to buy a computer, this is the first three things that you should look at in it. How big is the CPU? How, especially when you're comparing two computers, right? Obviously, you look at the sizes and you look at the prices, but generally, the bigger the specifications, the bigger the larger the price is. But sometimes those things are overlooked, especially when the person who's selling them is not as technical. So you, as a CAT student, you need to be aware of such issues, right? Then, of course, there are like those specifications, 21 inches, that means it's the size of the screen, right? And then you also have that 1920 times 1080, that's the number of pixels, the resolution, the quality of the picture the device will show. Those are some of the things that you can actually look at to further your needs. All right, then we also have Windows 10 is actually the operating system that probably comes with the computer. So those are some of the things that are usually common in an advert, right? So it is very, very important that you should always consider such things, right? CPU, hard drive, and RAM. Okay, right? So just as an activity, this is another example of a typical advert, right? Unfortunately, we don't have our live answering question. Actually, we would have had some answers here and quickly. But if you're at this point of this video, I'll just need you to just quickly jot down. I need you to tell me what's the speed of the processor, what's the size of the RAM, and what's the size of the hard drive, right? Just look through. I'll give you just a few seconds. study it carefully. Okay, I think you've probably managed to write down your answers. All right, so now let's look at it. The processor, the size of the processor. What happens in the question is that when they ask you the size of the processor, they don't mean the specification of the processor. They just mean the unit or the speed, right? Like in this case, oh, let me just check. Oh, all right, maybe it won't work. Right, in this case, the activity that we've just done here is that this 3.4, as you can see at the top, this 3.4 gigahertz, that's the speed of the processor, right? Then 8 gigabytes of RAM, isn't it? Then 1 terabyte of storage, right? And then there are other specification like this AMD Radeon 530 graphics. This one is for the graphics card. It enables you to play or use software with high graphics. Then this integrated GBE LAN, again, we spoke about local area networks. Then of course, that's the operating system. All right. So what you're meant to do there is to identify the RAM, the CPU, and the storage, right? So there you have the size of the CPU, the size of the RAM, right? Then of course the size of the hard drive, right? So especially in your exams, especially on section C, this is where you usually have such questions. So you need to be able to interpret each and every specification. All right, I hope that is helpful, right? So as some sort of homework, I would require you guys to look at at least five adverts, right? And compare the specs, right? Where can you get these adverts? If you look at catalogs from Game, Hi-Fi Corporation, Incredible Connection, Matrix, is it Matrix Warehouse, Dion Wired, most of these companies that sell computers, Macro, sometimes they've got these adverts. You look at 5 computers, 5 laptops, for example. You write down the specification. Can you write down the hard drive space, the RAM, and write down the hard drive space, the RAM, as well as the CPU speed, right? Then when you have done that, look at which one will be the best computer to buy, considering the price that is given. It's quite interesting. I'm sure you'll be able to do that. It's not really complicated. And I can tell you from today onwards, if you have gone through the lesson, you are probably going to think twice when you really need to buy. Even when you buy a phone, these are the things that you really need to look at. Look at the size of the memory of the phone and all those things. Because when you, especially a phone, something that you use almost all the time, it can be frustrating if you buy a phone with inferior specification. All right. So now next week we're going to go now to, like I promised yesterday, we're going to do web design. We're going to introduction to HTML. We want to see how you go about creating web pages. That one is going to be interesting. I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy your weekend, right? So we'll be seeing you soon. And remember, the most important thing is that you follow us on these platforms, and especially on Facebook. That's where you get the links. On Facebook, you get the links to the videos so that you can have live lessons whenever they come out. Then, of course, on Twitter, you follow the conversations, as well on YouTube. The videos of previous lessons, you can always find them there. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy your weekend. All the best. Thank you.